Hi everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions, and this week's first question comes to me from Mr. CBT Man, who has this to say: Hey Steve, my wife and I really enjoy your channel. Here's my question. I know you are a fan of mainstream DC. I haven't heard you mention Vertigo though. If you are a Vertigo fan, who is the best of the three legendary Vertigo writers? Frank Miller, Neil Gaiman, or Alan Moore? I'd say Moore, but I'm curious as to who you'd pick. Thanks. I would also say Moore, and to me it's not even that difficult of a choice. I know that Neil Gaiman is a genius and has done just phenomenal work, but for me, Alan Moore is one of my favorite comic book writers ever. I mean, from all throughout his career, when he was doing Swamp Thing, when he wrote The Killing Joke, he wrote a great Superman story called Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. He wrote the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which I love. The comics of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen are just outstanding. If you've only ever heard of like the movie version, you're really missing out. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comic books are outstanding. From Hell, obviously, of course, Watchmen and V for Vendetta. I mean, Alan Moore is just a genius. He's without peer almost. Frank Miller as well is awesome, but I think I enjoy Frank Miller more as an artist than as a writer, especially if you look at the totality of his career. I mean, he has written some outstanding stuff. I mean, Batman Year One, for instance, which he wrote only. David Mazzucchelli did the artwork for that. Miller's an outstanding artist, but if you look at most of Miller's signature work, Dark Knight Returns, the Sin City books, his earlier work on Daredevil, to me, he's defined more by his art than by his writing. So as a writer, I gotta go with Alan Moore. Vadim Cream. Steve, a few weeks ago you briefly discussed your love for the classic Universal horror films, Dracula, Frankenstein, etc. As a movie buff, I appreciate those films and find them compelling story-wise, but as a horror fanatic, I don't find them very satisfying because they don't ever scare me, creep me out, or provide visceral thrills of any kind. Do these films have that effect on you, and do you think we can ever really be scared by them due to generational differences? Those generational differences are a big thing, I think. We have just been accustomed to a different type of horror, like you call it, a more visceral feeling, more in-your-face shocks, more graphic scenes, more manipulative editing and things like that, and music cues. I mean, we're just conditioned to respond to a different type of horror. When I read books about the history of horror films, and I read accounts of how people were apparently fleeing the theater in terror from the first Frankenstein film. Part of me wonders whether that is just exaggeration to build up the legend of the film on the part of the studio. And part of me also thinks that it's that generational thing, that just there were people who had seen that movie who had never seen that type of mainstream film before. Because remember, the first Frankenstein was a huge box office hit, and a lot of people probably saw that had never seen a horror film on screen in a cinema before, and it just had an unanticipated effect on them. And yeah, I don't find them scary as such when I watch them. I appreciate them for other things. I appreciate them for their cinematography or their direction or their performances, or for camp value, things like that. I don't find them scary. They're great films, but I'm not really scared by them. WSR Man 33, here's a pro wrestling question and follow-up. Have they ever had an alien, E.T., not Mexican, etc. character? If yes, who, what, and when? If no, do you think it would fly, and how would you script it? Yeah, I seem to recall there being an alien gimmick in the WWE revival of ECW around 2006. It didn't go very far, it didn't last very long. I mean, it was meant as a joke. It was meant as a commentary on ECW being aired on the Sci-Fi Channel. And so it was never meant to be taken seriously, and it wasn't. And I think it may have appeared once and then just sort of gone away. And they also had things like a zombie, and they had vampire characters to sort of make light of the being aired on Sci-Fi. And I don't know. I personally, as a wrestling fan, am not a fan of those outlandish gimmicks, but they have been used in the past, and occasionally they have kind of sort of gotten over but most of the time they just wind up being novelty acts that get swept aside relatively quickly. I mean, there was in the mid '90s there was a tag team in the WWF called Techno Team 2000 that sort of had like a futuristic gimmick, and they never really went anywhere. There have been other gimmicks where a guy was supposedly from the future, or he was some sort of futuristic person, and it just never gets over because it's difficult to take that sort of thing seriously. And ultimately, even if you, as a wrestling fan, even if you acknowledge how silly it is, you always want to be able to suspend disbelief and get into the fight. And it's really hard to get into the fight when one of the guys fighting is supposedly from the future or from another planet or things like that. So it never really gets over, and it's not usually a good idea, and it certainly doesn't suit my taste as a wrestling fan. And I would add to that very quickly that I don't know for sure because I'm not as familiar with this promotion as a lot of its more devoted fans are, but there's an independent promotion called Chikara that has a lot of outlandish, sort of cartoonish gimmicks. And I wouldn't want to say that Chikara had never had an alien gimmick or an extraterrestrial gimmick, so that might be something to look into. But yeah, as far as like a mainstream, like big-time wrestling company like WWE or WCW back in the day, alien gimmicks aren't really a very good idea. Sensical oxymoron. What is your opinion on the rise of hipster culture? Maybe the shitty music or the lack of uniqueness in the individuals, how conceited those motherfuckers are? Is it bad we young folks have quite possibly the worst subculture movement of any generation? Oh, I don't know if hipsters are the worst subculture movement of any generation. I don't think they're as bad as skinheads. Well, but I know what you're saying. I mean, skinheads were never really, thankfully, were never really a major part of the culture, whereas the hipsters are a relatively significant, large subculture. Yeah, I think it just comes from an overabundance of self-awareness that is heightened far too much. Hipsters are, I think to me their defining trait is they're incredibly acutely aware of themselves and of what they think and of what they do, and they attach an undue importance and significance to it. A certain amount of self-awareness is necessary, I think, to avoid being an asshole, but if you have too much self-awareness, if you cross that line from self-awareness to self-involvement, then you sort of complete the circle and you wind up being a douchebag anyway. And I think that is the peril of the hipster. Diabolical overlord. Hey Steve, do you feel like you have any interest in mythology, ancient gods other than Yahweh or Jesus, legends, fairy tales, or folklore in general? Given your generally more than basic biblical understanding, I'm curious to know if you've studied these other things as well. I wouldn't say I have a major interest in mythology or legends or fairy tales, etc., but I certainly have an interest in those things to a degree. I mean, I think I've mentioned before in videos that one of my favorite works of literature is the Odyssey, which is essentially a work of mythology. I love the Odyssey. And I love grim fairy tales. My wife has a volume of the original grim fairy tales, and some of those things are just amazing. I mean, I admire them because they're so different from how we do modern storytelling. Modern storytelling is all about plot twists and turns and sort of hooking the audience, and there really isn't a hook in a grim fairy tale. These German folklore fairy tales are very direct, and it's point A to point B, and you can see from point A what point B is going to be. Like, as soon as you get what the premise is, as soon as you understand what the fatal flaw of the lead character is, you can pretty much guess what that character's ultimate fate will be, and it always happens exactly that way. There's no complication, there's no attempt at misdirection. It happens exactly as you expect it to happen. You know, the cat eats the mouse, period, the end. And there's something about the directness of that I just so admire and also am really amused by. And notice that it's not the way we do it nowadays in storytelling at all. So there's that, but it's not a passion that consumes me, but it's definitely something that I'm very interested in. And yes, it can be very useful when studying and debating religion, because there are many, many similarities between modern mythologies, which we call religion, and discarded religions from the past, which we call mythology. There's a lot of similarities because at bottom they're pretty much the same thing. Paul Hinchcliffe. Okay, here goes. Being an atheist and a world-class cursor, do you still use goddamn or Jesus fucking Christ as an exclamation, or do you feel that it takes away from the impact of your cursing? Thanks. Oh no, I love goddamn it. Goddamn it is a great word to say, and so is Jesus Christ or Jesus fucking Christ. Those are excellent curses. The fact that they refer to gods or to figures that I don't believe in is absolutely irrelevant to me. My use of them is rhetorical. It's a part of my idiom. It's just how I was brought up to talk. People from the area where I learned how to speak use those words as exclamations, as curses, and I do too. And the power of them to me doesn't come from their etymology or from their meaning or the literal meaning of them. It comes from inflection and context and things like that, more rhetorical things. The whole point of cursing to me is to express an emotion in an incredibly direct way. So if you hear me say "God damn it," that tells you something about my state of mind, and that's and my attitude at that moment, and that's the point. And the fact that I'm an atheist and I said "God damn it," those two things aren't related at all. The fact that I'm an atheist and I you know, if I hit my thumb with a hammer and I go "Jesus fucking Christ," the tone and the inflection tells you something about what is going on in my mind and what I'm trying to express by saying that. And the fact that I don't believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, etc., etc., is completely irrelevant. They're incredibly useful expressions and fun to say. And the fact that they don't match up literally with my own beliefs about religion or the world is completely irrelevant. New Nauno001. Steve, if you could write your own comic book story using any mainstream character or characters, what would be the story and what characters would you use? I've written some Batman fan fiction, actually. I've never had any sort of an opportunity to write, like, legitimately, you know, with publishers' approval for money for those characters. But I've written some fanfic that I thought was all right, or at least were good ideas for stories. And starting way back in high school, I actually wrote. I've written several drafts of a screenplay for a Batman movie, and I went back to it to sort of redo the story about 5 years ago to sort of bring it more up to speed with my current style as a writer and my own current take on Batman. And I don't think there weren't any of the major villains in it. It was about Batman looking for the killer of his parents, and the premise of the story was that he had never found his parents' killer, and now 10 years or so later he had stumbled upon this lead that might lead him finally to capture his parents' killer. And the story is about that and about him looking for the guy and perhaps having to come to terms with the fact that he might never actually be able to catch this guy. So Batman obviously would be a major character. Barbara Gordon as Oracle is a major character. Nightwing and Robin are both in it, the Tim Drake version of Robin. So a lot of the Batman supporting cast is featured in it very prominently. One of the themes that I wanted it to be about was Batman's surrogate family. But there aren't any major villains in it. The only villain would really be the killer of Batman's parents, Joe Chill, and I don't know if I would even specifically name him, but that's who it would be. And I don't know if he would even ever be on screen. You know, I don't know if he would actually even be featured in the, because my concept was that Batman wouldn't actually find him. It would be about Batman's obsession trying to get to him, finally trying to catch the guy who killed his parents, but just not being able to get him and having to face the fact that he's just going to have to let him go. That's what the story would be about. So no major villains or anything, just a lot of the Batman characters. And I had a scene in mind in my rewrite of it that I really love, of showing Bruce Wayne getting dressed as Batman, like in one of his penthouses in Gotham City, and he's getting dressed in the full light of the room, and you see him in the Batman costume in the full bright light of the room, and he looks absolutely ridiculous because he's a 6-foot-tall man dressed up in a Batman costume. But then he clicks the lights off and steps off into the balcony into the night of the city, and all of a sudden in the shadow and the indirect light of the city, he looks like a total badass. Like, now he's Batman. I thought that would be a really nice way of sort of acknowledging the silliness of the character, but doing it in a more subtle way that doesn't beat you over the head with it and doesn't ruin the suspension of disbelief or the verisimilitude of the film. And you can still buy into Batman, but it also acknowledges, hey, you know, this is Batman, this is silly, but it can still be cool in the right context. Oh shit! There's totally a thunderclap there just now. Hey, I guess you know what that means. It's time for
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
Great goat on fire. Steve, you Navy English major, why don't you English speakers / writers use more compound words? Just think about all the new words you would get to make up. Yeah, in English that's just not how we roll though. We tend to take our compound words and just, if they would be compound words in another language, we just leave them separate. Like in German, I think the word for like children's book is one word, and it's Kinderbuch. And it's literally the word for child and the word for book just kind of smashed together. And in English, we just leave them as separate words. We just call that a children's space book. And if that doesn't work for whatever we're trying to come up with a word for, we just steal a word from another language. Because that's how we roll in English. Practical Magic 9. Did you ever sport a mullet? Thank God, no. I never sported a mullet. My haircuts when I was a kid were always really nondescript. It just kind of grew out, and then when it got too long, I just had it cut into a shorter version of that. It was never an actual, I never had a definable hairdo as a child. And I never let it get that long anyway. And now that I'm an adult, I just kind of clip it really, really short and wear a hat all the time. So no mullet. Mulatto Zygot Weigel. If there is a God, what if he truly hates the gays? I know that there is probably going to be a reaction such as why not straight people also, since it seems like a personal attack. But if I started with that, if God hates straight people, people might let that be. Okay, well, if God truly hates gays, fuck him. Radical Bacon. I have an infected tonsil and cold things feel really good in my throat. What would you recommend I eat that's not a vampire in Stephanie Meyer's universe? I think they have this thing, it's like a sweetened cream that is chilled and churned into this sort of hard, creamy substance, like kind of a frozen yogurt, but not that. I don't know what they're calling it exactly, but I know they're serving it as a dessert in a lot of places now. You should look into that. Requiem Fear. Hey Steve, what, if any, mainstream media source do you use most? If none, then what news outlet do you mainly use in your day-to-day life? I usually use NPR. NPR News is where I get most of my mainstream news from. Either that or the local AM radio station that I listen to in the morning while my wife's getting ready for work. Christmas Teen. Hi Steve, I just noticed that your An Atheist Read series has come to the attention of Dark Matter 2525. How cool is that? Have you heard if he's produced the cartoon he mentioned yet? Are you feeling just a tiny bit starstruck yourself now? Absolutely, yes. He made the video. He gave me the shout out of my life. It was awesome. I'm up to 15,000 YouTube subs now, thanks to Dark Matter. I gained like 3,000 subs in the last week. It's stunning. It's absolutely stunning and incredibly humbling. And welcome to all the new people who haven't been watching my stuff before they saw the Dark Matter video. And thank you for the 4th or 5th time to Dark Matter, because that was such an awesome shout out. I appreciate every shout out that I've ever gotten. They've all been important to me, and they've all meant a lot to me. And Dark Matter, his shout out especially so, because he does such great work, and he has such a large audience, and for him to take the time to present my stuff to that audience meant a lot to me. So yeah, definitely starstruck, and definitely incredibly grateful and incredibly humble. And David Landon. Steve, coffee or tea, Star Trek or Star Wars, vampires or werewolves, humans or Zerg or Protoss, tastes great or less filling, pie or pie. Okay, gonna have to go with coffee. At least if we're talking hot drink, then it's going to be coffee. Star Trek, easily. Vampires, humans, tastes great, and the pie that you can eat. not the pi that you can use to calculate the size of a circle. So, that's it for the questions. And speaking of shoutouts and how important shoutouts are, the shoutout this week goes to Monkey Tail 2002. This is my friend Angus, who has been a great supporter of me and my channel for quite a while, and does good work his own self on his own channel. I've been thinking about giving him a shout out for quite a while. He's been on my list for almost as soon as I started doing this series, but I'm glad that I waited because he just recently started a new series on his channel dissecting Eric von Daniken's book Chariots of the Gods. He's doing it the same way that I do the Christian apologetics books, An Atheist Reads series that Dark Matter shouted me out for. He's going a chapter at a time, argument by argument, dissecting the book meticulously with great detail, subjecting it to a very close reading. And Chariots of the Gods, for those of you who don't know, is the book that kicked off the modern pseudoscientific preoccupation with the ancient astronaut theory, ancient aliens, all of that ridiculous horseshit. Aliens built the pyramids, aliens drew the Nazca lines, etc., etc. All that stupid shit. Aliens were responsible for the angels in the Bible. All the ancient astronaut bullshit. It was all started, in terms of the most modern iteration of it, it was all started by this book that was written in the late 60s by Eric von Daniken. And it's a bullshit book, and it's a bullshit theory. And Monkey Tail 2002 is taking it on, and I've only seen, he's only done the first episode so far, but it's really promising. And if you enjoy my stuff on the An Atheist Read series, and you enjoy seeing bullshit dissected and parsed and refuted bit by bit, then you should check out Monkey Tail 2002's series on the Chariots of the Gods, because the first episode was very promising, and I hope he sticks with it. Angus, stick with it. I want to see more from that series. So go subscribe to his channel. That is it for this week, and You Had to Ask. I will be back to do this again next week, but of course, for that to happen, you have to ask. You have to ask me questions for me to talk about. So leave a comment, please, on this video with your question. Ask me anything about anything. I will answer as many questions as I possibly can in the next video in this series. And until then, have a good week. I will see you next time.